The watchtower bells ring until everyone is either in their homes or in the nearest shelter. With his wounds, Asbel won't make it to the chapel. Hubert tries to comprehend the slaughter he just witnessed. It's a page right out of Fendel's war book. Asbel could never draw his sword against someone of Lant, and yet... At the sound of Asbel's labored breathing, Hubert pushes the frantic thoughts from his mind. He carries his bleeding brother on horseback to Lant Manor as fast as the old nag can go. Bailey's already outside. Horace stops his frantic pacing. He runs to help Hubert get Asbel off the horse. He stops himself from asking what happened. Right now, they need to focus on getting help. They peel off his bloody white coat and leave it in the courtyard grass. "Sharia! Sophie!" Sharia is in Asbel's study when she hears Hubert call from the front door. Her brother-in-law's voice runs ragged with desperation. She's instantly spurred to her feet and running with Sophie hot on her heels. Her heart seizes with dread at the sight of her gravely wounded husband. "Sophie, bring the pallet and sheet right now," she says. Their little Moloch runs like a flash of lightning. She's so fast that she's back with both items as soon as they bring Asbel and his trail of blood into the office. They can clean it later. Sharia's hands shake. She feels tears bead in her eyes, but she wills herself to stay calm. Asbel's had worse. She's healed worse. But there's nothing worse than seeing the one you love the most suffer. She doesn't even know what's happened. "Hubert, I need bandages." He follows orders and runs upstairs. "Bailey, Soraya's on his way here, but go and meet him halfway. If the watchtower bells are ringing, he could be in trouble." Bailey nods and runs outside. "Sophie, you're with me. Are you ready?" "Will Asbel be okay?" Sophie asks. Her voice is flat as ever, but her eyes always give away her fear. "If we do this properly, he will be," Sharia replies. She feels a tear slip down her cheek as she smiles. She's scared too. Both of them place their hands on Asbel, and his body starts to glow. She prays to their patron god, Maxwell. She watched Asbel take so many beatings over the years. Shot, stabbed, burned, and slashed. But she helps him get back up every time. Sharia is more of a field medic than a doctor, but by Maxwell she saved her husband's life countless times, and she'll do it countless times more. The blood starts to recede a little. However, she can't heal his head wounds without more help. Asbel's eyes flutter open just a little, but they're glassy and unseeing. Her heart tries to leap into her throat, but she tamps it down. As long as Saray gets here on time, Asbel will be fine. And Saray is always on time. As if on cue, the shepherd barrels into the room, disheveled and pale with Bailey behind him. Running all the way here can't possibly be good for a man in his condition, but Bailey couldn't stop him. Saray takes Sophie by the shoulders, smiling gently. "I can take it from here," he says. "Asbel needs help," Sophie replies insistently, but doesn't move an inch. Saray isn't bothered. "I know, but you've seen me fix him before, right?" Sophie nods, slowly. "And he was all better?" The young Moloch nods again. "I can do that again, but I need to sit in your spot." She seems to understand, but hesitates before she gets to her feet. She attaches herself to Hubert once he comes in, but doesn't take her eyes off Saray. As the Lady of Lant, everyone in town knows Sharia's healing arts. Her glow is the color of honey. Her healing feels like home. The arts are warm and comforting, even if they aren't advanced. As a clergyman, Saray's healing arts excel beyond that of a normal citizen. A bright circle opens up beneath them, full of runes and whispers that only the oldest Malachim can understand. Instead of milk and honey, Saray's arts feel more like pins and needles. Still, Sharia is glad for the help. Asbel's body starts to heal itself much faster. Sharia starts applying bandages and sutures wherever necessary. The blood behind Asbel's head starts to recede. Saray's eyes slide shut. He needs extra concentration for head wounds. Everyone holds their breaths, but then Asbel sucks in a huge gasp and his eyes fly open. The first thing he hears is a collective sigh of relief. The first thing he sees is his wife's face. Then he breathes a sigh of relief. "There you are," Sharia says gently. The circle under them disappears. "How do you feel?" "Everything hurts," Asbel replies, like he's waking up from a bad dream. Was anyone else hurt?" Sharia looks to Hubert, who sighs ruefully. "I'm sorry, Asbel, but there was casualties." Hubert says, sitting next to Sharia. Sophie sits next to Saray. "Gino, Gerald, Livy, and Mason are dead." Asbel lets out a strangled noise. "Misty is in care of the church." "And Livy's kids?" Asbel asks. "They're with my wife," Bailey says. "We can keep an eye on them for a bit." "I need to see Misty." Asbel tries to get up, but Saray and Sharia force him back down. "Not before I finish bandaging you up," Sharia declares. Asbel relents. They work in silence for a while. Some of Asbel's wounds are completely gone, but will continue to ache for a few days. Some of the deeper ones, like his chest and arm, will take a few more days to fully heal. Bailey brings Asbel's coat from outside. It's brown and crusted over by now, completely unsalvageable. For generations, the Lord of Lant has worn a white coat with their family's black Sopheria embossed on the back. Perhaps it's fitting that his coat is now covered in blood. A lord should never draw his sword against his people. "Okay, try sitting up now," Saray says. Asbel tries again, this time slower. It hurts, but it's better than dying. "I'm sorry, everyone," Asbel says, bowing his head. "There should have been a better way to subdue him." Everyone else in the room just trades glances with each other. Honestly, none of them are quite sure what happened. Hubert only saw Asbel kill Gino. Bailey heard the commotion, but committed himself to Asbel's orders. He's the one who rang the watchtower bells. Saray only saw the bodies. "It was demon blight, wasn't it?" Saray asks. "Was it Gino?" Asbel nods feebly. "You can purify demon blight, can't you?" he asks, suddenly desperate. "I can, but Gino was already dead," Saray replies sadly. "No one but a powerful Moloch with certain abilities can bring someone back to life. You'll have to go all the way to Izuchi for that." Asbel sinks. "Asbel, this isn't your fault. No one blames you." Hubert says, "If anything, they've all failed today." Their father glares from a portrait across the hall. The old man should have stayed alive long enough to teach them better. "Do you have time to inspect the bodies?" Asbel asks Saray. "No, but your mother has volunteered until I get back," Saray replies. Asbel tries to get to his feet, but Hubert has to help him up. "Either way, I need to show you something." He looks back to Bailey. "Do you have it?" Bailey nods and motions to the bundle sitting on Asbel's desk. He unwraps it and holds the firearm out to show them. Sharia gasps. Hubert takes a step back. Saray blanches. "I found it in the Major's house. I'm sorry, but could you take a look at it and tell me which one it is?" All eyes shift to Saray, who's frozen. Asbel balks. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked." "No," Saray says, shaking his head. "I can do it." Hands shaking, he takes a pair of reading glasses out of his robes. He takes the firearm from Asbel and turns the thing over several times. Everyone takes another step back. Saray pushes out a small cylinder chamber in the base of the gun's barrel, and the 5 bullets fall out. Saray inspects each of them. "It's definitely a more advanced version of the Fodran firearms," Saray says. "Do you see this?" He points to the hammer. "This one changes bullets automatically. It's definitely Spyrix." Sharia mutters a prayer to Maxwell under her breath. "But that's not the worst of it. Look here." He shows them the small letters on the side of the barrel. The letters are uniform, stamped into metal by a machine, not arts. "Made in Olympius, Spurious Inc., 276-497-72900. Saray picks up the bullet from the desk. The numbers on the bottom of the bullet match the gun. "If it's from Olympius, that means whoever was in charge of the Major's house could be planning an attack on their behalf." He places the gun back down like it's a hot plate. "Could that be why Crow attacked her?" Hubert asks. Saray seems confused. "The killer from this morning. She claims that she's the Velvet Crow." "Well, that's practically blasphemous," Saray replies. "They buried Sister Crow with the highest honors when she died. I was there. She inspired him to become a shepherd in the first place. She had to have been almost 90, maybe more." Did you ever see her? No, but common people aren't allowed to see Montellis and Anomenod. The Silver Flame ceremonies are held by Lord Melchior, Saray explains. Especially not since, well, you know. He scratches the back of his right hand nervously, the hot tickles of panic streaming down his face. He's sweating. His hands are still shaking. He knows those guns. He knows how they feel pressed against the back of his head. His right hand burns. He's going to be sick. Excuse me. Bailey nearly goes after him, but hesitates, looking back at Asbel. Go. I'm fine. Asbel lies, but Bailey won't disobey a direct order. The four of them sit in silence for a moment, trying to absorb the last 2 hours. Launt Manor has never seen a more somber day. Its lord sits in his father's old office. Even though the title and manor have been passed to Asbel, they've never belonged to him. His skull feels so heavy. His aching neck can hardly lift it. The pain blurs his vision. If he can't pull himself together, Launt, no, all of Highland could be in danger. We should examine the bodies next, Sharia suggests. Between Asbel, Sophie, and the baby, she wants nothing more than to march down to the prison and scream profanities at Velvet Crow until she's blue in the face. Victoria, Gino, Mason, Livy, and Gerald were all a part of Launt, and now, through some cruel cosmic joke, they've met violent, bloody ends in peacetime. Their survivors are just children, wide-eyed and helpless, wishing they could forget what they just saw. Just like the children they'd rescued from Findle. Richard looked the same way when they pulled him out of the abyss. Even now, she has nightmares about clutching his emaciated body, pouring all of her healing spells into him just to keep him alive. I shouldn't have done that to Saray. Asbel barely gets to finish that sentence as the pain in his head interrupts his train of thought, stopping just short of running after the shepherd. Asbel. Sophie doesn't know what to do when her father's like this, but she tries to help. Not now, Sophie. Getting the usual response doesn't stop her from posting herself in front of the door with her arms out. Your head was bleeding. Sit down before it bleeds more. Sophie persists. Asbel knows he can't move her. Sophie doesn't know her own strength. He turns back to Sharia, who places her hand on her hips. Hubert places a gentle hand on his shoulder. We can't lose you too, he declares, and we can't rush things. Looking into his eyes, Asbel knows he's right. Besides, if you move too much with a concussion, you'll have much worse than a headache. He gently turns him around and sets him back on his father's chair. I'm going to check on Saray. You two rest for a minute. He points to Sophie. Keep an eye on them. Sophie nods and posts herself at the door once it closes. If Crow's right, we don't have time to waste, Asbel insists. You can hardly walk in a straight line. You're no use to anyone like this. Sharia snaps right back. She plants herself on the desk. Asbel opens his mouth to respond, but promptly shuts it. Ashamed, he looks away. But Sharia lifts his head to look her in the eyes. You did what you had to do. What if Gino had gone on some kind of rampage? He could have killed everyone there if you hadn't acted. It's not a good thing, but it was the right thing. Asbel rests his pounding head in his wife's lap with a rueful sigh. Can't let this place become a war zone again, he says, hating the lump in his throat. Sharia runs her hand through his hair, careful of his wounds. I still remember the blood on the street, the sounds of people screaming. I can't let that happen again. We won't, Sharia says firmly. We promised we'd only ever think of the future, remember? She takes Asbel's hand and places it on her belly. The baby kicks, knowing her father is nearby. Their future is supposed to be peaceful. His family deserves it. I love you, Asbel says. He's meant it for over 15 years. I love you too. Dusk approaches by the time Asbel feels well enough to meet everyone outside. Sharia and Bailey decide to stay behind. If Asbel's going to the chapel, someone needs to be at the manor just in case. Hubert takes them to the chapel by carriage. Launt is on lockdown. Militiamen are everywhere. Anyone who's not in the chapel are in their homes, locking their doors for the first time in a decade. Some peer through their windows as they roll by, offering prayers of encouragement. Some throw petals into the street for good luck. Hubert decides to skip the Major's house for now, so he takes another road. Saray starts to breathe heavily again. He wipes his brow with his sleeve. He can't shake this terrible feeling. He feels the malevolence, but how in the world did it get here? Malevolence doesn't just appear in places so full of Eleth. When they arrive at the chapel, Hubert has to help him out of the cart. Take Saray through the back way, Hubert says. I'll put the cart away. No, it's fine. Take me through the front, Saray says, shaking the dizziness from his head. Asbel and Hubert exchange uneasy glances. Hubert opens his mouth to respond, but Asbel interrupts them. He has to face his people one way or the other. Okay, but I need you to tell me if you're not feeling up to it, Asbel says. They make quite a pair, one wounded and the other sickly. Hubert tries to protest, but Saray walks past him. He's too tired to argue. Desperate parishioners look up as the heavy oak doors creak open. Light breaks through the dimly lit chapel. Uncertain murmurs rise up from the congregation. Their fear and judgment washes over Asbel and nearly drags him under. He made a grave error, one that he must answer for. Their eyes follow him in hushed silence as he steps up to the pulpit. Some bend to touch and kiss Saray's garments as they walks by. Others take his hand and press it to their foreheads. Word travels fast around here. Maybe too fast. Asbel steps behind the podium and looks out at all of the familiar faces. He knows them all by name. Saul, Diane, Franklin, Midge, and so on. He's known them nearly his entire life. He has nothing prepared, but he won't let their worries go unassuaged. A loss for one of us is a loss for all of us, he says. The crowd murmurs, paying their respects to those who've died. The day I took on lordship of this province, I swore it would always know peace. I failed you. I'm sorry. Asbel bows his head. I humbly ask your forgiveness, and please know that I will do everything in my power to make this right. Not just for you, but for Gino, Mason, Gerald, and Livy. He looks up to see some nodding their heads, others looking skeptical. He's never seen his people so desperate. He can't imagine the pandemonium if there's another incident. When the muttering starts again, Saray decides it's time to intervene. Please, I urge everyone to stay calm and pray for your neighbors in need and everyone who has lost a loved one today. They need your support now more than ever. At their shepherd's words, people's shoulders unwind and their brows unfurrow. Warmth creeps back into the room. But, Lord Shepherd? A young lady steps out of the pews and walks up to him. Her face is set, but her hands are shaking. What about the rumors? People are saying that Mr. Gino was sick with demon blight. Is that true? Murmurs rise with Asbel's nerves, but Saray isn't bothered. In fact, he approaches the young lady and places his hand on her shoulders. The way he looks into people's eyes and sees their fear and pain must be of the gods. Midge. The girl smiles, knowing Saray remembers her name. Even if it's true, you are doing the best method of fighting it, sticking together and believing in each other. Malevolence feeds on distrust. As long as you stay together and trust each other, that is the greatest defense against malevolence. If we find any evidence of it, I will purify it. Midge sniffles and throws her arms around Saray. We trust you and Lord Asbel, Lord Shepherd. We know you'll make this right, she says. Finally, the congregation starts murmuring affirmations. Thank you, everyone. I have some business to attend to in the clinic. He looks over to Saray. Can you lead them in a quick prayer, please? Saray nods and gathers everyone around while Asbel disappears into the back. His head aches. His heart thunders in his chest. He sits on the nearest surface just to catch his breath. How can he possibly make this right when he's not even in fighting condition? This day has lasted a year and it's not over. When Saray leaves the room, he finds Asbel with his head bent and his eyes screwed shut in silent prayer. He clears his throat gently. Oh, sorry, Saray. Asbel staggers to his feet and wipes his eyes as subtly as he can. The shepherd never judges him, but his understanding smile makes him feel exposed. Do you need a minute to rest? He asks, desperate to deflect. I would like to speak to the bereaved first, if that's okay. Saray replies instead. Asbel doesn't press the issue. and ask the nearby nun where she is. According to Sister Uriah, the poor girl hasn't said a word since the incident. It's not surprising. Misty trusted Gino her entire life. Then he split her twin brother's neck right in front of her. Her mother hasn't come home from the Enclave yet. Just before she left, Misty promised her that she would keep an eye out for their shy, timid Mason. In the end, she broke that promise, and it broke her. She sits on the room's singular bed. Her sleeves are still covered in Mason's blood. She's been unresponsive to Uriah's attempt to get her to change, so the spare dress hangs uselessly on the headboard. She doesn't speak when Saray approaches her. When Asbel tries to follow him, he stops. I think you should wait outside. Reluctantly, Asbel lingers outside the door. Misty? Saray asks. She doesn't respond. He sits next to her on the bed, and she still doesn't flinch. I know things are dark right now, but please, know that you aren't alone. Your mother will be here soon. Until then, you can rely on us. Misty's hands ball into fists, but her empty expression doesn't change. After a long silence, he continues. You know, I had a family in Gand. I was raised by Malakim during the war. When Fendel invaded Logris, I'd been adopted by an old man named Zenris. They called him Gramps all the time. If anything, he's the only father I've ever known. Misty sniffs. Saray hopes it's progress. He was trying to protect me, and it only got him killed in the end. I didn't speak for nearly a year. Probably never would have again, if it weren't for Mikleo. Asbel fights a lump in his throat for the second time. He's heard the story before. He was there. He knows Mikleo, and he knows the unbreakable bond the two share. Let us be that for you. Saray tucks a lock of the girl's hair behind her ear. If you can't stand up on your own, let us be who you lean on. I know Gramps wouldn't want me to live in despair, and I know Mason wouldn't want that either. Mason wouldn't have wanted that for anyone. Not just me. Misty interrupts quietly, her voice hoarse from screaming. He was good like that, you know? Sweet and nice, and he just... She gazes at her clenched hands under Saray's and unwinds them. Her brother's blood is in the grooves of her hands and under her fingernails. She breaks, wailing for the loss of her brother and neighbors. She lays her head in Saray's lap, and he prays as she cries herself into exhaustion. Asbel can hardly stand the sight of it, and closes the door. He finds Sister Uriah and asks her to bring a basin of warm water for Misty, but he can still hear the poor child sobbing through the wood. The Laud family has watched over their province for generations. Quaint and small they may be, but this is one more story, and a legacy of turmoil. Even his father had his fair share of heinous crimes, but there was never a single case of demon blight. So why now? Laud has always been full of Eleth. If there was malevolence, why hasn't Sophie sensed it until today? Make sure her hands are clean, Saray advises as Sister Uriah walks by them. Asbel doesn't know how long he's been standing there. Don't worry, Lord Shepherd. I won't let her out of my sight, the nun says, and she shuts the door behind her. At least there's something good that's come out of all this. For what it's worth, I think your grandfather would be very proud of your work, Asbel says appraisingly. The shepherd turns a bit sheepish and scratches the back of his head. Really? I feel like I've got so much to learn, he says bashfully. Regardless, you've put what you do know to good use. Asbel replies with a small, grateful smile. Saray isn't built for effusive praise, so he changes the subject. Come on, I'm sure Mom and Hubert are tired of waiting. Asbel takes him to the mortuary. A militiaman stands guard. They've barred the bereaved from entering. Lady Carey takes one look at her son and throws her arms around him. Oh, thank goodness you're all right, she says, squeezing far too hard to mind his injuries. Thank you, Saray, for taking such good care of him. She turns back to Asbel. And make sure you thank Sharia for me too. Lady Carey lets go of her eldest and picks up right where she left off with Hubert. It's so strange, she says with a sigh. I've compared both bodies, with even the major being in a state of decay. This woman matches her. Even her moles and birthmarks are the same. I only know of a few arts that can copy a person's appearance so thoroughly, and they take a powerful caster to do so, but... Come look. She uncovers the woman's face and opens her eyes. They're yellow and bloodshot. She shows them the palms of her hands, too. They can hardly tell at first glance, but looking closer, the crevices of her hands are discolored. Skin discoloration is the first sign of Spyrix exposure. Someone with Spyrix exposure wouldn't find it easy to cast arts that powerful unless she's a Moloch. This killer is definitely not a Moloch. There's no tattoo on her. She hands them a parchment where Hubert scribbled Velvet's tattoo. Saray frowns. Only someone with deep, abiding hatred for Maxwell would give someone that brand. Did the woman who killed her say who gave her this mark? Saray asks. He doesn't want to touch it. No, only that it would mean she's right. Hubert says, shaking his head. She refused to say anything else. Why? That's the mark of a Therian, Saray says. The Lawns have never heard of such a thing. Therians are demons that feed on malevolence. They were once created for the purpose of consuming malevolence and therefore purifying any affected areas. But only a silver flame can do that, Lady Carey says, unbidden. She covers her mouth, realizing she's spoken out of turn. Well, we know that now. The experiment was a disaster. He turns to Asbel and Hubert. You were there, actually. Miglio and I weren't just candidates for armatization. Hubert gasps with the realization. Therians are made from people and Molochs under extreme duress. They don't exist in nature, however. He rounds the table to get a better look at the imposter's hands. Powerful Therians have special abilities. It's not a stretch that this person could change her appearance or shape. Take a step back. Let me try something. The Lawns do as they're told. If this is a Therian, then the silver flame could lift the art long enough. Saray mutters a prayer to himself. For a second time, a circle appears beneath their feet, full of runes and those disquieting whispers. He takes out one of his many paper talismans. It ignites himself with Saray's glittering silver flame. It's a gift from Maltellus himself. It floats over the impostor, lighting the body with its holy light. Slowly, the impostor's blonde hair starts to melt away. Her muscular body starts to shrink, and lines in her face sink into her cheeks to reveal an emaciated woman with dark hair and massive splotches of discolored skin all over her body. Her wrinkles are filled in with gray and yellow. Sure enough, she carries the mark of Therians on her wrist. Saray can't light the flame for very long. Once it goes out, the body slowly starts changing back into Major Victoria. Saray crumbles into himself, and Hubert narrowly catches him. Lady Carey gives him a chair. What does this mean? Asbel asks. Saray needs a moment to catch his breath. The Launt noble family racks their brains for an answer. Victoria Bell was a mean woman and an infamous taskmaster, but she was never cruel. No old recruits would be looking for revenge. Moreover, the impostor looked older than the Major. There was no one from the woman's past that could come after her. She grew up in Launt. With her husband gone, Major Victoria has no living family. Lady Carey directed the funerals for her mother, father, and 2 brothers. I think this means that this crow woman might be right, Saray says. The Launts gaze up at him, almost insulted he would even suggest it. Perhaps even more so, that he's probably right. Is there anything else that can corroborate her story? There is one thing, but we'll need to go to the Major's house, Hubert says gravely. I need to know if you're up to it. At first, Asbel thinks Hubert is talking to Saray. It takes him a second to realize that it's him everyone's concerned about. I'm fine, Asbel insists. Saray and Sharia fixed me up. I'm good to go. Hubert just sighs and pinches the bridge of his nose. Saray, once you feel better, we can go. This day just won't end, it seems. He sweeps out of the room, and Lady Carey goes after him, leaving Saray and Asbel alone. They sit silently among the dead until Saray collects himself. When they leave the mausoleum, the chapel is empty, and their mother has retired for the night. The walk to the Major's house is gratingly silent. Asbel is tired. He could have died today along with everyone else. His daughters would grow up without a father, and his wife would have to preside over his title alone. He can't abandon them. But what will he do if something like this happens again? Honestly, he doesn't want to think of what might happen if Demon Blight hits another civilian. This begs the question, What kind of resentment did Gino harbor if malevolence could manipulate it so easily? He doesn't have it in him to investigate the man's house, not when he just killed him. Somehow, the Major's house looks so much more imposing. It's night now, but he can still see the stains in the cobblestones. Thunder roils overhead. He wonders why it hasn't rained yet. When he woke up this morning, he had a plan. Breakfast with his family, morning meetings, depositions. That seems like another life. Perhaps he was stupid to believe that Highland could just avoid the war altogether. Perhaps he's even stupider for believing he was meant for anything but battle. He should have noticed something was wrong with Major Victoria. He should have taken her seriously. He should have invited Livy for dinner more often. He should have told Mason how much he'd grown despite his silence. He should have told Gino that he couldn't have survived the war without his wisdom. Here we are, Hubert says to Saray. But he's looking at Asbel, who's gone several shades whiter. This is a bad idea. He hesitates before speaking again. According to Miss Crow, there is a hole made of malevolence right under this house. That's not how malevolence works, Saray says, crossing his arms and gazing up at the house. He's seen it several times during his stay in Lont, but it seems more intimidating now. Something about its stark facade set him on edge. There's definitely something wrong. Malevolence always feels the same way. It's like any human emotion, really. Everyone feels it one way or another, but you can get overwhelmed by it. That's what demon blight is. When you get so overwhelmed that you can't come back from it. He places his hand on the door. Something is definitely wrong here. Doesn't malevolence affect you physically? Hubert asks. Sherry did say you weren't feeling well this morning. Well, yes, it does. Saray trails off for a moment, stuck between embarrassment and guilt. It's hard for me to tell the difference between that and my own, illness these days. Hubert and Asbel exchange worried glances. Then, back to Saray. Is there any way you can find it? Asbel asks. He doesn't want Saray to overexert himself, but he can't let this malevolence remain in his town unchecked. Saray nods and takes out one of his calcified paper talismans. Where does he keep those things? Stand back. They do so, and Saray starts to glow. Another circle opens up beneath him. This one might be different, but the cold chill and disembodied whispers are the same. The paper floats over and plants itself on the door. It lights up with silver flame. Saray presses his hands together in prayer. Hubert has to shield his eyes. He's never seen Saray purify something before. It's a simple process, really. Usually, Saray only needs the silver flame and the malevolent victim. Purifying something is like straightening a tangled rope. Every tangle is different, and some are impossibly complicated. But he's never seen anything like this. It's just like Crow said. There's a giant, yawning chasm underneath Lont. Eleth is a river that sustains the life around it. Some places get more than others, but that's the beauty of it. However, when that river is disturbed, all life around it is disturbed as well. This is not a disturbance, it's not a blockage, it's not even an overflow. It's just a hole. Instead of disturbing the river, someone has parted it, and wherever there's no Eleth, there is malevolence. And it's slowly filling the yawning emptiness. He can't allow this to get worse. He doesn't know how to fix a hole in Eleth. He can at least take care of the malevolence. Asbel shields his eyes as the light grows brighter. The good thing they evacuated the houses nearby. Saray wraps the inky blackness in his flames, then presses down. Malevolence never gives up without a fight. He's seen it all. Convulsing bodies, wailing rocks, and gnashing teeth. He's felt the earth shudder like there's a massive bubble underneath it. But he's never heard the malevolence. It groans and thrashes. He hears whispers, pleas, and screams. He hears the clashing of swords and the splashing of blood. He hears people crying out in agony, surrounded by the sounds of Lont's war. He tries desperately to restore the balance to the Eleth, but it screams resistance. The cold claws of panic start to sink in. His hands are shaking. He's sweating all over. He knows that if he can hold on just a little while longer, he can beat it into submission. There's a stabbing pain in his chest, but he can't back down. Not yet. Saray thinks desperately. Somewhere in this darkness, Mikleo calls out to him. His voice is ragged with terror. It's not real. He knows it's not real, but it's a familiar sound. Suddenly, he's back in the Fendelian laboratories, clinging desperately to Mikleo, pleading with the faceless soldiers, trying to drag them apart. He can't even feel the pain of his fingers breaking as they pelt him with the butts of their rifles. Fear and death are everywhere. Their only comfort is in each other. When the Fendelian army finally breaks them apart, Saray screams. But something's different. Instead of the sirens going off, the Fendelian soldier places a firearm to Mikleo's head and fires. Blood and viscera splatters onto his face. Mikleo's body falls into his lap, spilling everywhere. From Mikleo's head, black blood oozes out. It spreads into every crack and pore. The soldiers start to scream in terror, but all Saray can see are Mikleo's lifeless eyes. Thick, sticky shadows start climbing him. They sink their teeth into him. They pour from his eyes and sink into his mouth, suffocating him, ripping open his throat from the inside. All at once, Saray's circle vanishes. His knees give out, and he coughs blood onto the doorstep. He's not strong enough. How horrible. That's not how it happened. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. It's not... Hubert and Asbel pawed him. They try to soothe him, but he can't hear what they're saying. He can't stop shaking. His greatest fear, realized right before his eyes. He could hear it, taste and smell it even. Tears blur his vision. Terror restricts his breathing. He tries to catch his breath, but only ends up vomiting. Blood drips from his nose. Blinding pain fills his head. He holds onto it to keep it from splitting open. How horrible. He must have blacked out, because the next thing he sees is the ceiling of Launt Manor and Sharia leaning over him. There you are. I was beginning to worry there. She's so kind and gentle. Saray almost wants to go back to sleep. It's past midnight. Sharia is in her nightdress, completely exhausted. She dabs at his face with a warm cloth. Someone's removed the top of his hanfu. His throat burns from vomiting. He must have made quite a mess. How embarrassing. I'm so sorry. Saray tries to sit up, but Sharia gently pushes him back down. He doesn't fight it. His arms feel like jelly. Asbel said you found the hole Miss Crow was talking about. Sharia interrupts his apology. If she lets him get started, he'll never stop. Saray nods and looks away shamefully. You weren't able to purify it. She tries in vain not to sound disappointed. Not alone, at least. Saray says. He looks at his hands. His fingers are long, but crooked from frequent breakage. There's no blood on them. Crow was right, Saray says. Sharia only sighs her disappointment. Saray sighs and rubs his brow. The headache is starting to settle in. Does she know how to fix it? I don't know. If she does, she's not telling us unless we agree to let her go free, Sharia says. So this Crow woman wants them to choose between their ethics and their safety. It's smart, but cruel. Hubert and Asbel finally went to bed after arguing for hours. Did they decide anything? He asks. They made a compromise. Crow will be going with Asbel to Windor. Since they found something that belongs to Olympius, one of us has to talk to Richard and discuss our next move. Since he's still not exactly in fighting shape, I voluntold Asbel to go. Sharia tries to smile, but she falters. I have to go with them, Saray says. She lets him sit up this time. I need to speak to the shepherds in Windor. I need to know if they know anything about this, and if we can stop it from growing. I've had hard times purifying before, but never like this. If we let it go unchecked, something terrible will happen. He screws his eyes shut and tries to will away the vision of Mikleo's death. Mikleo is still alive, he tells himself. Mikleo never died. He's in Izuchi, and he's fine. What did you see in the Malevolence? Asbel said you coughed up blood and collapsed. You gave him a hell of a scare, you know. I don't think he's ever heard you do something like that. Sharia has, but only once. They don't talk about it. Saray takes a long moment to answer. His hands start to shake. He doesn't know how to describe what he'd seen. He heard cries of the war Lant had left behind. He saw the prison he'd been free from, and the friend he nearly lost. He saw the worst possible outcome of every situation. Children crying from hunger, moans of the ill and dying, the sounds of battle and the smell of rotting corpses, followed by an impossible, all-consuming darkness. I saw the end of the world. The end of the world. The end of the world. The end of the world.